stand up.
Hello, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us today. We're super happy to have you here and delighted to welcome back Yishan Wong and the Terraformation team. And big shout out to Shelley Gollin, who with Mercury and a friend of mine has arranged for Terraformation and Yishan and company to be part of our webinar today. We had the pleasure of speaking with Sean on the Arthur's Roundtable podcast a short while ago. We're fascinated to learn more about what's going on with Terraformation. Just a quick note on housekeeping. We know you're there. We can't hear or see you, but we're welcoming your questions in the chat or the Q&A, and please post them as they come to mind. We have a lot of people coming on today, and we'll get to as many as possible. We're going to be recording this and posting it to the Family Office Insights YouTube channel and socializing it in other ways as well. It's important to note that one of the things that's super fascinating about this effort, aside from its objective, is that a number of Silicon Valley and other notables have invested heavily in Terraformation, and we'll talk a little bit about that as we go along here. So welcome, everybody. Thanks for being here. Please feel free to post your questions, as I say. And with that, Yishan, thank you for doing this again, and welcome to the team. Shelley, thank you for arranging it. And please, let's start from the beginning, Yishan.
Great. Well, thank you again for having me. And I guess it's nice to be here again. We are a company that was founded, I guess, by a fusion of both Silicon Valley tech and experts in reforestation. And this has made it a very interesting journey because usually those worlds are very far apart, and it's a very it's like two different cultures. But I think in coming together and learning, I think that represents a microcosm for what the world needs to do in solving climate change, because it's such a multifaceted problem. And everyone on the planet is a stakeholder, which really means that you have a lot of competing and different views, different cultures, different backgrounds and biases, and learning to knit all of that together into a common understanding, and even more into an understanding that can move forward and take strong action that works for everybody. That's a pretty big challenge, and we have that in our company, but I believe that achieving that is a model for what the world needs to do. So we work hard on that every day.
Yes, and isn't there a fair amount of the global population, and we don't need to know exact numbers, but don't even know that this is a problem, right? Especially in some of the areas where you're active in regions in the world.
I would say so, though I say that more because not everyone knows everything, right? You have areas where there's a lot of science awareness, and you also have a lot of areas where people are just being directly affected by it, and they know that the world is changing, and they know from the time of their parents and their grandparents that the world was very different, right? Like, it's like many of us you remember, like, in the 1980s, there weren't as many, there were many more birds, right? If you went on a car trip, your front bumper and your windshield would be covered with bugs, right?
Right.
We remember this. This is now no longer the case, right? So a lot of people know about this and understand it in different ways, is what I would say. So it's a lot of different people know a lot of different things, and putting that knowledge together is one of the, I guess, tasks that we have to undertake.
Yeah, and anecdotally, I can tell you that I grew up in New Hampshire, and we used to have 6 feet of snow in the winter, and we would jump the snowmobiles across the front walk because the piles on either side of the walk were so high. And while it still snows, it's a fraction of that. Now, I don't know if that's a good data point for global warming, but it's something's going on, right?
Something's going on. There's definitely seasonal and climatic weather variations. So overall, it's the large scale trends that concern us. But I think still decade over decade variations can be noticed for sure. And if nothing else, they're things that we need to be really aware of. I'd rather us be really on top of these things than to just be like, oh, it's changing. Maybe it's good, maybe it's bad, right? You sort of want to just be on top of these sorts of changes in your environment. So yeah, I grew up in Minnesota, by the way, so I
So
totally know
same
what
thing.
you're
Yeah.
talking about. Yeah,
Yeah.
you were a wild kid. You're jumping snowmobiles over
Yeah, no,
these
we were
centuries.
definitely wild. Yeah. Yeah. Calm down a little bit. Still do the snowmobile thing, but calm down a little
Right.
bit.
Not as high a jump.
Yeah, exactly. So let's page through the deck for a little bit, and then if it's okay with you, I've got some questions as we go along.
Sure. All right. Well, so one interesting stat that people may want to know is we do have now pretty rough estimates of how many trees are on the earth and how many were on the earth when we started out. And when I say we, I mean collectively we, mankind. There were about 6 trillion trees on the planet before mankind came about. And today we have about 3 trillion trees. So we've lost roughly half of them. And interestingly, you would think that we may have lost these forests due to recent deforestation, but in fact, forests have been slowly declining since the dawn of human history. Mankind, we'd sort of move into an area, and we might cut down the trees, and grazing animals for a long time, for thousands of years, were actually responsible for deforestation, sort of grazing animals that we would bring with us. After you cut down forests, uh, forests will in fact grow back very rapidly after you cut them down. But if you bring in grazing animals, they'll eat the tender young shoots, and that prevents the trees from growing back. And then once the forest stops growing, it doesn't cool the land as much. And so that doesn't allow for clouds to form, and the rains go away. And once the rains go away, then the forest slowly becomes a desert. So we have actually been changing the climate for much longer than we think. And now recently, though, although we have lost about half of the world's forest since the beginning of mankind's time here, there are many successful efforts to bring them back. And so in recent decades, we're still losing more forests than we are gaining, but the rate of gaining has increased. So there are large successful reforestation efforts. And part of that is not just human efforts, but something that's pretty important to point out in the context of this entire effort is that nature is always trying to help us. That's something I observed now that I've started, just starting to work on this. We do the planting, but we're not even the main actors. Nature is always trying to grow back everywhere. Like life finds a way.
Yeah.
And yeah, nature, it works 24/7, right? Like, if you work in restoration, if you work in climate, you take the weekends off, the holidays. Nature never takes time off. It's just continually growing. It's trying to come back all the time. And I think that is one important theme, which is that nature is trying to help us. It is all the time taking down CO2, trying to grow back, trying to restore itself. And I think helping it do so is really what this is about, because it's trying to do the heavy lifting, and we just need to help it along.
Yeah. So help catalyze what it's already doing. That's an interesting way to look at it, right?
That's
Yeah.
right. That's right.
Yeah.
Um, and so this, I guess, I can talk. I think that sort of brings up the idea of the many different types of climate interventions that have been proposed and many people are working on. So, there's reducing emissions, and there's also drawing down CO2 out of the atmosphere. And there's many ways that people are working on that. And one of the ways in which forest restoration has one benefit over almost all of these, is that it has an enormous number of what are commonly called co-benefits. But it's really that some climate interventions have a very, very narrow implementation focus. The the focus is squarely on carbon dioxide removal, right? Like, like direct air capture is really just, you put up a huge fan and you pull the CO2 out of the air. That's the only thing you're doing. Forest restoration is interesting in that it does that, but it has so many other benefits. Like if you care about biodiversity or restoring endangered species, most people ask, how do you do that? Just as an example, right? And they sort of imagine like, well, maybe you have some sort of fancy lab somewhere where you bring back the animals or something, but that's not actually how you do it. What you do is you just restore their habitats. And
Yeah,
when you
create an
want to,
environment where they can prosper, so to speak.
that's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Uh, and so to restore a habitat, trees are the anchor species. It is primarily the restoration of forests that restores biodiversity, allows endangered species to come back because they feed on all of the byproducts of the forest and the insects and the fungi and the bacteria and the tree litter, right? Like grasses, all of those things that those species co-evolved with. If you bring that back with the forest, the populations just explode, right? Like you know how it is. And any
Yeah.
sort of animal or insect or whatever, as soon as the food supply's there, they just come back, right? And that's just one example. And so if you want to avoid narrow climate interventions and you want something that's broad based, forest restoration really is that sort of key wedge that allows you to do it all. So I think that's like that's one of the biggest advantages of forest restoration, and that's why I've chosen to work on it.
So I'm
Yep.
looking at the next slide here, but I have a question.
Mhm.
If it's too soon, let me know. Uh, how do you decide where to execute?
Oh, that's interesting. Um, I guess we can go to that on a different slide, but let's just jump forward 2 slides and we'll go to that. Yes, this one, and then we'll come back.
Okay.
The way we do this is there's a key thing that we've found, we again collectively mankind, about what makes a forest restoration project most likely to succeed. And that is the participation and buy-in of the community. So we
Totally
have
makes
had
sense. Yeah.
that's right. We've had 30 to 40 years of attempted reforestation projects, and some of them have failed and some of them have succeeded. And what that is that's actually really good experimental data because it tells us, what is the difference that made the ones that succeed versus the ones that failed, right? And and what we found, what the research says is the primary determinant of success is community buy-in.
Mm.
And so where we focus our efforts is we find communities and like municipalities, but also larger governments who want to restore forests. The people there have to want to restore forests. You cannot go and take someone else's land and say, hey, we're restoring this forest, you stay off of it, right? You can't actually do that because the true owners of the forest are whoever is nearby, right? That's the sort of maybe it's a primal truth or something, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And
Tribalism. Yeah.
yeah, it's like if you're there, you either want the forest or you want to cut down the forest,
Right.
right? And so if the community wants that forest, that's who we talk to. And in fact, they come and people actually come and find us. And so there's lots of groups that want to restore forests. And so what we do is we help them fill in the gaps, right? Because to do it it's not rocket science, but it's still things you need to learn to do, right? Like how do you build and run a nursery? How do you track the trees? How do you verify that the forest is healthy, right? And how do you get access to capital to finance that work? So we find groups, and lots of groups want to do it, but don't necessarily know how to start, or they're just missing one thing. And that's one of the things that we do, which is we help fill in those gaps and we help build the capacity to do so.
Is it fair to say that most of what you found to be good targeted projects are reforestation as opposed to land that's open and the communities amenable, but there was not a forest there, but there could be?
Mm, actually, could you state that again? Sorry.
My convoluted question, sure. Is it largely restoration projects, or are there places that didn't have a forest but warrant your attention?
Um, I would say that most of the time when we talk to groups, or groups reach out to us, there was a forest there
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah,
at some time in the past. It could have been recent, or it could have been something that's kind of ancestral, right? Like they have tribal knowledge and they know this area used to be a forest, or and the climate changed, or maybe there was a deforestation event. So usually there is memory of a forest.
yeah,
Yeah, I would say that that's by far more common. Usually groups aren't, you don't really have like desert tribes trying to reforest the desert.
right. Yeah,
Although it's kind of a gradual continuum.
yeah. What's the second most important thing aside from community buy-in?
Oh, I would say that it's probably land tenure. So land tenure is actually something that's very different in all areas of the world. I'm not even sure I can sort of give a, a sort of single rule for that. In the United States, we have a very developed what's called like fee simple system, right? Like you, all the land is kind of accounted for, you buy it, uh, and then you have it and you're responsible for it. It's
Yeah,
it's pretty cut and dry. Elsewhere in the world, who owns land and who is responsible for it is not always very clear. There are traditional land ownership systems. Sometimes the government sort of claims control over all of the land. Sometimes the government designates the land as being a national park, but it's not a national park the way the United States would think of it as a national park. People just still live on it and cut down trees
right.
in the national
Yeah,
park. And then there's all sorts of places where it's just totally unclear. And you sort of need not exactly ownership the way you would think of in the United States, but you do need some sort of continuity, right? You need to know that whoever is planting the trees is going to be there, and other people are going to respect the fact that they planted those trees, and not try to take over the land, or cut down the trees or something like that. And so the common community-wide understanding of who is responsible for this land, like whose responsibility is it to take care of the land. I think that's one of the big questions that always needs to be resolved, and it's different from place to place. It's actually, I've learned a
yeah.
lot about land tenure in
It's
almost
really
that.
interesting. I happen to be exposed to a fair amount of places in the world that don't have perfected interest title like we have, that are attempting to do it, but it's been amorphous at best, right? It's
Yeah,
one of the things that is perplexing to us as, you know, being in the US, we sort of take that as a perfunctory right to
yeah,
own
we
something.
just assume it. Yeah, and then
Yeah,
suddenly
yeah,
it's not at all something you can assume everywhere.
yeah. Yeah, take a left at the bear that looks like a rock.
Yeah, it's a,
Right. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, it's wild. And there's lots of places like that
yeah,
I've come to learn. Yeah. So you want to jump back to the other slide?
sure. Now, this slide actually it talks about funding and financing, but the real theme here is actually just the massive, massive scale that is possible here. And This isn't as apparent when compared to other potential climate interventions. And one of the things that I've learned in tech, which is one of those lessons that's you only get after, I guess, like multiple generations of companies in tech, and you realize this, is that if you want to solve a really massive scale problem, you need to have as little technology as possible. This is the thing that I learned after scaling, or like PayPal or Facebook or Reddit, these like massive scale things, because you're going to have problems when you're reaching scale that are unique to the scale themselves. And so what you need is you need to know that all of your each unit component is highly reliable. And Silicon Valley does a good job of marketing and saying, hey, this technology is magical. It's going to solve everything. It's not going to make any mistakes, right? But actually, yeah, we have a saying. It's like no one hates technology more than a technologist because we've worked with it in a lab, and it's full of bugs, right? And so if you take a brand new state of the art thing and you try to make a million of them or a billion of them, in this case, we need a trillion, and it has like a 1% defect rate, which would be fine if it was like just your iPhone, right? Like every 100 days you have a glitch, right? If you have a million, you're just going to have bugs all the time. And so when you're trying to do something at huge scale and you have a bug, you need to know that your unit component does not have bugs. And you need to be able to isolate that problem in the scaling so that you can solve the scaling problems. So what I found is you actually want to reduce the level of technology as much as you can if you want to achieve something really, really huge. And this is a unique and underappreciated element of reforestation as a climate solution, which is that trees, as as mysterious as they are, we understand them better than we do new technologies, right? Like we've lived with them for all of human history, right? We are less ignorant about trees than we are about our newfangled contraptions. And so what that means is climate solutions involving forests are accessible to a much, much larger number of people. And that's really important because climate is a planetary problem and everyone on the planet is a stakeholder. Um, you can go to anyone on the planet, literally, and they know what a tree is. Right now, the science of reforestation, there's a lot more complications, but fundamentally, understanding that more trees equals good is
Yeah.
something that every human understands. And the broad accessibility of this as a solution is essential to achieving the massive scale that's needed. So that's really what this is about. All right, there's a big TAM, right? There's a large financial opportunity, but really underlying that is, hey, everyone gets it. Everyone can contribute, and that's really how we reach scale.
Yeah. During our last discussion, I uh, was grateful to glean that information from you about the thing that's often overlooked is if you're building at scale with technology, you better know how to fix the foundational technology without adding new shit in that you don't know how to fix yet. Because
Yeah,
when it breaks, no one knows how to fix it.
yeah,
So at least you know that the stuff that's the foundational stuff is gonna break, but you know how to fix it, right?
right,
Or break less, right? So
right.
that was really helpful to me. Thank you for that. I've used it multiple times.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah.
Always
Yeah.
glad to dump on technology.
Yeah. Where do you want to
So
go
good.
next here?
Well, we'll go to the one after this. I guess
Okay.
the next key thing is it's something that probably many people realize, and it's so foundational that we kind of forget it. So this is like a somewhat simplified version of capital inflows and outflows of a typical project. And the main thing that's important to see is this huge curve that that occurs after the investment, that the primary project period. And this is probably one of the greatest strengths of reforestation as well, which is when you look at it as an investment, you have an investment and a payback period. But and so when you sort of do these analyses, you just sort of cut off the payback period. You say like it's just okay, it ends here, and this is where the payback is. And by doing that, people often forget that after you're done, the forest continues to grow. And this is assuming we're doing like resilient, self-sustaining forests, not like a timber project where you plant it and you
Cut
cut
it
it down.
down
Yeah,
eventually. Yeah.
right. The establishment of resilient, self-sustaining forests means that the forest is perpetual, and that even after all is said and done, after you have invested, after you've planted, after the forest is grown, after you have accounted for the carbon credit returns, the forest is still there. And it's not like a depreciating asset as many, like if you were to build a factory, like factories just depreciate, right? And many capital investments just depreciate over time. You have a depreciation schedule. Forests continue to grow. And in fact, even this sort of like decline over time is actually just counting that forest and not the forests that it actually seeds. Because one of the things that we actually know implicitly as well is that old growth forests continue to grow. It's not like the forest that's 1 million years old is declining, right? It's still there from 1 million years ago. It never really declined, right? Forests continue to grow, they continue to deepen, and they become deeper and deeper carbon sinks. And that's a thing that's a perpetual legacy, essentially for all time. Many people forget about this because when you sort of narrow your focus into an investment period or into an investment instrument, you've turned it into this box, right? And we don't often remember that outside of the box is this perpetual forest legacy, right? That outlives all of us, all of our investment periods, right? Like old growth forests are hundreds of thousands of years, or there's some that are millions of years old, right? And they don't really decline or end. They just keep going. This is really a perpetual thing. And that's different from any other engineered solution that is fundamentally a depreciating asset.
This is a great chart. Uh, yeah. Is it fair to say that the returns are a mix of economic returns and uh, the returns that you expect from carbon sequestration? Or is it solely economic returns in this chart?
You can think of them as a mix of directly accountable, that is like things that you can account for using, you can measure it and then you can pay for it and you can buy and sell it. Directly accountable economic returns and broad-based improvements to the environment that allow us to have a thriving economic engine.
Yeah,
And so I'm speaking very broadly there, but you can think of it as if you have extremely volatile, volatile is not the word, that's the economic word, but if you have extremely high variance weather, right? Like lots of chaotic weather events, that makes it difficult to make certain predictions
sure.
and to engage in economic activity, right? Like
Yeah,
you don't want uncertainty, right? A business wants certainty,
yeah.
right? And if you have a stable climate, that's better for business than an extremely unstable climate.
Which
And
is true
so,
for the forest as well, right?
right, exactly.
Yeah,
And forests help the life on the planet, right? Like carbon sequestration basically helps stabilize the atmosphere. It stabilizes the weather. And so by reducing instability in the weather, that's not a thing that you can really directly pay for, right? Like this is the closest thing you're going to have to weather control, right? You're going to
right.
control the
Yeah.
weather and you're going to help make it stable. And there's a broad-based economic lift from doing that. So you can sort of think of it as a split between directly accountable economic benefit and this broad-based economic benefit.
I love this chart. Would you say that in year 2024, 25, where the returns equal or exceed the investment, are largely economic, or benefiting the community because there's jobs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, okay, we actually structure the projects so that the benefit is evenly split between providing the investor who provides risk capital and the community who is putting in sweat equity, right? Who they're planting the trees, they're maintaining the trees, and you want all parties to benefit. So you can actually decide how you want to structure it, right? Because this part is directly economically accountable, so you can decide.
Yeah.
There have been projects in the past where it was very lopsided, and that's part of the data of, hey, if the community doesn't benefit from it, they're not going to take care of the forest,
Yeah.
right? They're
Really,
not going to
really
care as much.
simple. Yeah.
Yeah, so
When's the last time you cleaned your Hertz renter car, right?
right, exactly. So you have to benefit. You have to.
Yeah.
So we actually structure them, and that's what that makes everyone a stakeholder, and that's why it succeeds in the long term.
Yeah. Great chart.
So if people want to get involved, there are in fact multiple vehicles by which they can participate, and we sort of break them down into four primary themes because people have different major motivations for why they want to support reforestation. Mine sort of covers all four of them. That's why, this is my life and I'm running this company. But people who invest and want to contribute generally think of it in four different ways. And these are catalytic, perpetual, profitable, and direct. And I'll sort of talk about what they really mean. Some people want to get involved because they want to take the action that helps get everything started, right? Like things just aren't moving. They want to be I hate to use combustion related metaphors, the fire starter,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
You get it, you get the ball rolling.
Yeah.
So there's vehicles that do that. Um, there are vehicles that take the returns and roll them into more projects. So it's a perpetual investment. And some people really like the perpetual long-term legacy element of reforestation. Just the idea of like this thing's going to just keep going. It's going to keep going. It never ends. And then some people are motivated more by IRR. And so there are vehicles that are focused primarily on the financial returns. They are long term, but they're focused mostly on the financial returns. And then there are other ways. If you want to just do something direct, if you want pictures of your trees and you want updates of the specific forest that you are helping to plant, we have a program. It's directly accessible on our website, actually. Some people just want to see and hear and touch what they're doing. They don't want it to be this abstract thing, and we have a program for that as well. So we realized, hey, everyone is a stakeholder. Everyone is different, looks at things differently. So we have different vehicles for doing this.
Would it be okay, and if not now, later, to do some bragging about the folks that have voted with their checkbook so far?
I'm always up for bragging.
Yeah.
We're hearing other people. Yes.
I saw it on some of your collateral material, but if you wouldn't mind, you got Sam and his brother. You've got, maybe I'm wrong about, is Andreessen Horowitz involved? Oh no, you've got the guy from Salesforce,
Yeah.
Benioff, right?
Yes. Mark. Yes.
Yeah.
I think the most interesting thing is that we have people from across the political spectrum. Um, maybe to avoid whatever I shouldn't like name the far left and the far right, whatever.
Yeah.
But the interesting thing is that we are a pretty broad-based solution that everyone can get behind, everyone can understand, and it's just like it's pretty nonpartisan because like who can dislike trees,
Right.
right?
It's
This is
true.
sort of the way it
Yeah.
works. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Oh, did you mean you wanted me to go through the list or something you're talking
Yeah,
about?
you can if you want to. I just think look, human nature being what it is, when people who are in the know and have arguably endless amounts of money vote with that money, then it gives other people at least permission to open up dis a chat, right? To think of,
Yes.
I mean, right or wrong, that's what we do as humans, right? We get
Oh,
permission, right?
yeah, yeah. So then I guess I would say, yeah, Sam Altman led our Series A. Sam Altman and his brother. Uh, we also have, and Mark Benioff, people know him. He was a big spokesman for Trillion Trees. Joe Lonsdale is, uh, he's a pretty big voice in the current American industrialist revival, right wing,
No doubt.
yeah, movement. Um, we're practical. We don't virtue signal. We just get it done. Right.
Right.
That's how I sort of think of trees. Like trees, they don't talk. They just do. Right. They help you. Right. And then we have other, yeah, I could say like left leaning, but also sort of centrist. I don't know if people know Naval from Angel List. He was a big early
Oh
backer.
yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And oh, who else? There's so many now.
Yeah.
My old
That's
boss from Facebook, Mike Schrepfer, is a backer. So he's working on climate. So yeah, we've got a lot of people just in tech and outside of tech who are across the entire political spectrum. I think is the real key here.
yeah. Uh, I'd love to talk about this just because controversy is good in some people's view. Why do you think Gates came out and tempered his position on this, not trees, but climate change? I mean, it just happened the last few days.
Mhm.
What's your take on all that business?
Oh, well, I wonder if you've read well, I don't know. I think I wrote a thing and it was too long to be controversial. But here's my take on the real thing behind that. So there's been a lot of I'll first go over what people are saying about it, and I think they're just wrong and they don't know what they're talking about. The sort of the naive view is like he's saying, oh, climate change isn't as big a problem, we don't need to worry about it, right? That is not what he's saying. He says many times in his memo, climate change is still a very serious problem. I'm still doing this, this, and this is very important. We need to work on it, right? And so, what is he really saying? And I think part of the problem is that because he is such a public figure, he can't just come out and say it in a really blunt way. But I will, I will. So the history of the climate conversation is that there was like this early phase and then there was this modern phase. And so in the early phase, you basically had two parties that talked about climate change. And one of the parties was scientists. And so they looked at all this data and they were like, okay, climate change is happening. This is going to be a really bad thing. In like 50 years, we're all kind of going to be screwed, right? And definitely in 100 years if we don't change anything. And then the other party in the conversation was fossil fuel companies, actually. And we now know they internally they also knew that climate change was happening. Like we now know there's this famous Exxon chart where they actually mapped it out, and their curve was actually more accurate and more severe actually than the scientists. Um, but they decided, hey, it's 50, 100 years away. Let's just make a bunch of money in the meantime. And so they work to discredit the scientists. And so the net result of that was that there was no policy movement. More recently, we had many, many political activists. I would say that a lot of them were on the sort of liberal environmentalist side of things who got involved in the climate conversation. And these activists were much more skilled at driving awareness and driving action because that's what activists do. Scientists are actually very bad at this. Scientists always make like very limited claims. They're very hesitant to say
Yeah.
anything definitive. But the activists were much better at doing this. And they were successful. I would say like this is exemplified by like Greta, right? And these activists were very successful in driving the message into the public consciousness and then subsequently into policymakers' awareness and willingness to do something. But the problem is many of these activists are non-technical. And there's a difference between solutions to technical physical problems and social problems. Climate change is a technical physical problem. There are numbers involved, there are atoms involved. There's like real things, right? It's like gas molecules in the atmosphere. Social problems, if like abortion or taxes or immigration, and these are social. And you don't necessarily need numbers to form a view because the views are sort of value-based. They're moral. And so the problem is this. If you come up with solutions that are kind of based on your values and your morals, and there's nothing wrong with that per se, right? Like many views have to be made based on your values and morals. They may or may not be the correct ones by the numbers. And so you in order to solve a large scale technical physical problem, it has to be like the actual solutions that you implement have to come from people who are technically, scientifically capable. And the scientists can diagnose, but they're not necessarily solutions implementers.
Yeah, well, they're not executors, right?
They're not. I mean, I don't want to sort of like denigrate them in that way, right? But it's like when you're a scientist, you describe how something works. And if you're like, I'm an engineer, right? If you're an engineer, you're like, okay, how do I solve this problem? What do I do? Right.
Yeah.
And so for a technical problem, you need technical by the numbers thinking. Yeah. And you can't really apply moral values-based judgments on those solutions necessarily, right? Because sometimes you will have a solution that is workable if the number is one way, and if the number is a little bit different, you have to use the opposite solution, right? And climate is very big and really complicated. Yeah. And so you need a variety of solutions. And as I sort of surveyed all the solutions when I was looking for like what was the right climate strategy, I found that like there were solutions that were kind of from a values sort of vibes, morals basis, favored by the left and favored by the right. And in different places, you needed to use different ones. And in fact, if you use the wrong one in the wrong place, you would have an opposite,
the opposite effect. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
So here's what I think Gates is saying. What has happened is the momentum from all of the politically oriented activists spilled over, or sort of the inertia drove a bunch of solutions that were well-intended, but not technically correct in all cases. And we've now seen that some of them have had the opposite effect, right? Like emissions would rise, or the cost of doing the lower emissions thing went up rather than going down, right? Because you want to reduce the cost of doing the emissions friendly thing. So in some cases, right, like people starved or their food prices went up, right, to an unsustainable degree. And so there were many of these policies that were driven from sort of a non-quantitative, non-technical point of view. And they're very narrowly focused. It's like, oh, we have to cut emissions. Okay, just do everything to cut emissions, right? Like, is this really going to help? Or how do we cut emissions? We do this thing or that thing, and it turns out the emissions went up, right? There are a bunch of those that happened, and the way he's saying, he tried to sort of boil it down. It's like, well, we have to think about human welfare, and that's probably the best you can do when you're addressing this global audience, right? And you gotta say, like, take into account all of the variables. It is maybe another way to say it, but even that statement is a little bit abstract when you're talking to politicians.
Yeah.
Right. And so what has happened is there are a bunch of these solutions. The failures, unfortunately, are pretty severe from a public policy point of view, because you still have like climate deniers who then point to that and say, like, look at how much damage this climate action is taking.
Well,
right?
you can substantiate your position by having any type of evidence that just substantiates your position and ignore the rest of it, right?
Right, exactly. And
Yeah,
and it's, you know, the real answer is like, hey, some things were done wrong and some things were done right.
yeah,
Let's do more of the right things and then sort of
exactly.
examine the things that went wrong and figure out how to not do that again.
Yeah,
Right. But you know, that kind of nuance is not what we have in politics. Right. So I think that's actually what Gates's real message is. Like there's certain sort of contingent which helped drive a lot of awareness, right? But at some point, if you're going to solve a really large scale technical problem, you've got to hand it off to, yeah, talk in my book here, right? Like the engineers, right?
yeah,
But
yeah,
the people who sort of do it by the numbers. And and those solutions are not going to necessarily be what you call like politically aligned, right? They're politically correct and incorrect in both directions. Like
yeah.
it is the real truth, right? Like both parties are going to have things that they don't like. But if you do it by the numbers, if you really want to succeed at a technical problem, that's how you got to look at it.
Yeah,
That's
that's
my
super
view,
helpful.
my
No,
interpretation.
no, I really appreciate that because there are endless amounts of people on either side of this, scientists and social conscious behavior that are doing things that they really don't understand. Uh, I'd say less on the science side because science is
Like
evidence-based, right?
yeah, scientists are slightly less mistaken than
Right.
often mistaken as
And
well. Yeah.
and we've adopted in our lexicon something that I think is really effective. It's called virtue signaling, as you said a little earlier. And so there's people that will do shit all day long because they authentically believe they're doing good, but they have no idea what the outcome is.
Right.
And they've attached themselves to an ideology that says, well, I can't not do this because otherwise I'd be a bad person. But they haven't gone to the weeds and find out really what the effective is, right? So
Yeah.
I
So
oversimplify.
if I were to be charitable, I would say probably in the narrow circumstance that when they first encountered that solution, it was a good solution. But it's there's so much of a range of where you can apply that there's many ranges where it falls short, right? And you've got to know the numbers to know where it stops, right? Like where the limits of this solution are and where you have to try something else.
Yeah, and listen, I don't, it's, I don't even know if this is true, but there's a friend of mine that really did a lot of research on recycling plastic, right?
Mm.
And he came out and said, "I've done all the research. It's a waste of time. Like we're completely wasting our time. It has no impact. In fact, it has the opposite. Like, and I was interested enough that I went a little bit down the rabbit hole to try to
Yeah,
understand what his position was. But based on his research, he's right. Meanwhile, I'm a bad person if I don't recycle.
right. Well, I've also looked into this actually
Yeah.
because when I was living on Hawaii Island, there's a lot of plastic waste, right? And an interesting thing about living on the island is like the waste doesn't go anywhere.
Yeah, it
It's still with
just
you,
goes
right?
around.
Like,
Right?
yeah.
Yeah.
If you can't recycle it, it's still there.
That's a
Um,
different reason, right? Lifestyle,
it's
right? Making sure
it's
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 not on
it's
the,
slightly,
yeah,
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 it's kind of interconnected in a lot of different ways.
yeah,
That question is very interesting because it boils down a lot to the energy required in the recycling.
right.
Essentially, if
Yeah,
you spend too much energy recycling, then you have a sort of net emissions compared to, right, like getting new plastic by, you know, getting oil out of the ground, right? I'm sort of this view that we should kind of like try to store and compact all that plastic while researching way energy efficient ways of using
yeah,
it, because like, you know, then you can go back and like dig it back out of the ground, right? Like I have a friend who believes that at some point it's going to be more efficient to dig up plastic from landfills than it is to dig up oil, because at some point that equation flips, right?
yeah.
And
That
so,
would
so
be
it's
cool.
always very important to look for those sort of transition points
Yeah, that
where
would,
the economics flip, because that's when the whole thing changes,
yeah,
and not everyone thinks about it in terms of numbers like that.
yeah. That would be cool. What do you think about and if there's more on the deck you want to go through, because we're going to run out of time here, but I hope you don't mind if I ask one
Oh,
more
I'm
question.
okay with Q&A. That's all I had from the deck.
Yeah. Uh, have you watched Landman?
I've heard of that. You
So
refresh my memory.
yeah, it's Billy Bob Thornton, Taylor Sheridan directed it, wrote it, produced it, whatever. And it's become a very, popular show. And
Is this the one where he like has a whole thing about the windmills?
yes, well, it's windmills, but it
I have so
basically
many
is,
opinions about
yeah,
that.
yeah. Basically, the discussion was the person he was talking to was ill-informed, but it doesn't matter about oil, right? And Landman is all about the the business of oil and how dangerous it is, blah blah blah. But it's entertainment. It's not factually true. But what's become popular is his diatribe about how we have to continue to produce oil, and it may not be the best thing for the environment, but we use so much of it that if we run out, we're all screwed in the meantime because it is in everything, right? And we depend on it. And so, the argument was, you're right. It probably is not the best thing for the environment, but we don't have a credible alternative at the moment at scale. It's basically what you say, but it was more articulate than that. But it became a dramatic part of the show that,
Oh yeah, yeah.
you know,
Oh, I would love the chance to like take my things and like rewrite them and for the most dramatic,
right,
most well
right, yeah,
articulated way in the
right.
movie. I mean, it would be amazing.
Yeah, right.
um, yeah, yeah, yeah. Um, yeah, the central there's a thing that people I guess I don't really account for, which is and they argue over this central point. They argue around it, which is how much change can we make if we're really trying, right? And so
Excellent
and so,
point. Yeah.
and so right, like people justify what they do based on that, right? Like so, some people think, well, it's okay if we just kind of lie or bend the truth because it'll make people do this thing, and doing that thing is valuable, right? And and I'm a little like I'm a little split on that question, right? Because here's the funny thing. So my background is in engineering. I'm also a CEO. Now, there's probably people in the audience who immediately understand what I'm about to say. So as an engineer, I'm like, no, these are the facts. Of course we have to change. And it's because we understand that the facts point this way, so we're gonna change. And so we will put all our effort into doing the thing that we need to do, right? So that's my one viewpoint as the engineer. Okay. My viewpoint as the CEO is sometimes you've just got to kind of yell at people because they're not going to act like engineers. And if you really want them to be motivated, you've got to bend the truth a little and say, like, this is going to be a big problem. Get to work. This right, like this is really important because what the end result you're looking for is maximal effort in the necessary direction.
Direction, right?
And people are motivated in different ways.
They
And
are. And
yeah, so
but what
like, communication is all around us.
and incentives work. Like, you go back to the
Yeah,
incentives, right? Okay, the employees of the CEO, he might be required to bend the truth a little to get them motivated to do something. And it might be a combination of that plus changing the incentives,
yeah, or
modifying your
the
behavior,
vehemence
right?
with which you express anything as a CEO, so it makes a big difference.
Yeah,
It's what
totally.
except for the engineers. The
Yeah,
engineers always want to buy the numbers description,
yeah,
and so having been in both, it's
yeah.
very different.
Yeah. There's a guy named Mo Gaudat that wrote a book called Solve for Happy: An Engineer's Perspective. Do you know Mo? He was at Google, pretty
I
high.
think I've heard of this.
Yeah.
What's the yeah? Can you refresh my memory on that?
Yeah. So Mo was at the part of Google that was the innovation part. I can't remember what he called it, but he was there for many, many years. Smart guy, became a good friend of mine uh, when he retired from there, and then had this book tour. Uh, and I read the book, and it's just awesome because he was an engineer, right? So it was a
Yeah,
different perspective than, incense, wine, and candles, kumbaya, blah, 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 right?
yeah.
To solve for happy. Uh, and he continues to speak and publicly and on so forth. But his when you read the book, you can tell it was written by an engineer because it was not fluff. right?
Right.
There was no fluff involved. Uh,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I can tell you the secret if you want, so you don't have to read the book, although I'd recommend it. He said, "You are not your mind, you're the observer of your mind. So make sure you listen to whatever your mind's doing and then act accordingly without it being the driver, right? So you have to
Mm.
sort of observe what's going on rather
Mhm.
than maybe taking it too seriously, right?
So it's not just what am I thinking?
Yeah,
What am I realizing that I'm, how
exactly.
am I feeling?
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. Kind of like the Buddhist thing where they say, okay, bring it out here, examine it, and then let it go, right? Right. So
Right.
it's,
Yes, exactly. Right.
yeah,
You allow the thoughts to just pass.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So, all right. So we got to wrap it up, but let's just be clear to everybody. They can participate in any one of those four ways.
Mhm.
And uh, I'm going to ask you this because I have a piece of land I'd like to do this with, but I don't think it'll qualify. But we'll talk
Oh,
about it offline.
okay.
Uh, but if somebody has access to land, perfected interest in it, preferably, and we did talk about last time that U.S. has this pretty, you know, is doing a pretty good job of forestation compared
Yeah.
to other
The
parts
US
of the
is
world.
really doing quite, yeah, like the US doesn't get enough credit for that. Yeah.
Yeah. But if people want to vote with their checkbook, there's four
Many
serious
ways.
ways they can
Many
do it.
ways. Yeah.
And uh, so I asked all the questions, but let me see. Does forest carbon offset market suffer from a crisis of credibility? In your opinion, what is the necessary sway public opinions that reforestation is not greenwashing? How about that?
Well, I'll try to, I think I know what the question is getting at.
Yeah.
So I'll sort of unwrap it. Do you have the time? A few
Yeah,
minutes.
yeah, we'll have to jump eventually, but let's give it a try.
Sure, sure. Um, so yes, here's the first part of the question, which is that the phrase like carbon offset or forest carbon offsets refers to a large number of different things. And I would say maybe like in the preceding, I was in 15 years or so, there was one type of forest related carbon offset, and then there's like another one. And in in general terms, I'm going to divide them into two categories. One of them is what you would call avoided deforestation, which is basically you pay someone to not cut down trees.
Right.
The other one is reforestation. There's the technical term is afforestation, which is you pay someone to plant trees. And in order to have reliable accounting for this, you have to do a bunch of things like monitoring and verifying that this thing was actually done. And in particular, you have to, like in the case of avoided deforestation, if you pay someone to not cut down trees, there's this question of, well, were they already going to not cut down those trees? Right. And that makes sense, right? Because if someone's already not going to cut down the
I
trees,
love it.
right,
Yeah.
and you
What
paid
was
them,
your
then
fake
when
contention? Right.
right, and it's there's all these sort of like convoluted like technical ways of trying to sort of solve this question, but fundamentally it comes down to the fact that you can't really tell whether or not they were going to cut down those trees, right? Like you can't like split the timeline
Yeah.
and tell,
Right.
and that makes those offsets fundamentally unreliable because you also have this like weird ironic effect where if you paid a bunch of people or a bunch of sort of landowners or enforcers to not cut down some trees, one of the ways you tell whether or not they would have not cut down those trees is by looking at nearby land and seeing if where this wasn't the case, if those got cut down, right? But you can have an effect where if you did this for like all these landowners and you paid them not to cut down these trees, then the peer pressure effect caused these other nearby landowners to also not cut down those
Not
trees,
cut
right?
down the
Because no one
trees.
else was cutting down their trees, right?
Yeah.
So you've actually had an extra positive effect, but that because they didn't cut them down, then someone else can argue, well, these guys weren't going to cut them down anyways, right?
Yeah.
And then so now these credits are worthless, right? And you shouldn't have paid them, right? So that's obviously wrong because we do need to find a way to pay people to not cut down trees. Like people who
Yeah.
don't cut down trees are like doing a service, right? So you have this complicated thing, and it's actually fundamentally unresolvable to a degree, right? It's like somewhat resolvable,
I could see
but
that. Yeah.
ultimately there's
Yeah.
this conflict. Okay, with pay people to plant trees, it's much more clear cut.
Yeah. Yeah.
Ha ha ha, clear cut, right? But like if there's no trees there, and you pay people to plant trees, and those people go and plant the trees, and then 10 years later, it's green. They planted the trees, right? Like
Yeah.
the reliability is much more fundamentally, accountable. So the first thing is that there's different types of carbon offsets. There's also other types of like carbon offsets. There's like improved forest management, which is kind of like in between. Um, those also are like you take certain actions and the forest gets better and sequesters more carbon. But the two poles are the avoided deforestation and the reforestation credits. And so what was called the forest carbon offset market was for a long time just avoiding deforestation, paying people to not cut down trees, because also not cutting down trees is like, absent all of this, a much better way to have trees sequestering carbon. It's much
Yeah. They're
cheaper to
already
not cut
there.
down trees than to
Yeah. They're
plant
already
trees, right?
there.
It's
Yeah.
10 times cheaper. So you actually want to do as much avoided deforestation as you can,
Yeah.
right? Before you spend money on reforesting. Now, of course, there's a limit to the number of trees you can not cut down because
Yeah.
that's basically all the trees you have, right? And then you have to start planting new ones. So this is an infinite market, but the market mostly focused on avoided deforestation for the longest time. And unfortunately, it has this like fundamental accounting,
Flaw.
intractable accounting
Yeah.
problem,
Yeah.
right? And so eventually there were scandals because some people were willing to just be like totally unscrupulous about this. And there were many, many projects that were actually perfectly good, right? Like you paid people to not cut down trees and they didn't cut down the trees and the trees stayed and they grew and it was happy. But that
Yeah.
doesn't make the news, right? And you
Right.
only need a few scandals to sort of bring the whole thing down.
Tainted. Yeah.
And yeah, and so there were like, there was a scandal and there was a second one and then there's a third one. And that basically just cratered this market. The market still exists, right? It's still worthwhile to not cut down trees, but essentially like people just like kind of didn't like it. And um, the prices are just much lower than they used to be. Interestingly, this was very good for our business because although it tainted the overall perception of trees and carbon offsets within the actual trading markets, the people who actually traded were like, oh, okay, but reforestation is much easier to account for. It doesn't have any of these problems. So the prices here like stayed up or even rose, right? And so the relative fundamental integrity of reforestation credits, if you view them from an accounting standpoint, is much, much, much stronger than avoided deforestation.
Yeah. So it's flight to quality type situation.
Right. It's a flight to quality, but
Yeah.
it's really important to understand the difference between accounting quality and let's call it like impact difference making quality, right? So this one has accounting quality, right? You can much more easily tell whether or not you planted trees. If you weren't going to plant trees, whether or not they're going to grow on their own, which is no,
Yeah.
right? Versus avoid deforestation, where the counting is difficult, but on a dollar for dollar basis, not cutting down a tree is really the most important first thing you should do, right? For impact, but the accounting is murky. So there's this interesting thing where like accounting does not perfectly reflect the real world, and the difficulties of accounting can affect how people see things from a, like is the accounting good versus the real impact.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And
so that's sort
that's
of picking apart the crisis of credibility
yeah,
element of
super
this.
helpful. Yeah. And listen, if you got smoked on the bad, the three crises, then you're walking away anyway, right?
Yeah. The companies that specialize in this, they just went under.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
um, But I can sort of like answer the second part though.
Sure.
Um, so I think actually the credibility element is important because most people kind of look at it from a distance, right? They're not going to look at it. How often do you look at the differences between like certain types of bonds versus other types of bonds, right?
Right.
Actually, if I'm talking to family office managers, maybe they look at it all,
Yeah. Right.
right? But like most people look at it from a distance, and I think that it turns out that you can advocate for reforestation with the public without turning it into carbon offsets. And the way we talk about it is just focusing on the fact that more trees is better, right? That's really how the public sort of understands
Yeah.
trees. The public doesn't really understand carbon actually as a thing. Like if you go out and ask people like what is carbon dioxide, right? Like point to it, right?
Yeah.
The what? It's like actually here. I pointed to some carbon dioxide, right? But most people don't know. Right. So the degree of technical understanding and financial understanding within the public is actually fairly low. And the way that and this is actually an advantage of reforestation, which is people do understand that forests and trees are good, right?
Tree's good.
They are, yeah,
Yeah.
like the romance of the forest is something that humans intrinsically deeply understand. Like
Yeah.
what we try to do is our materials don't try to talk a lot about like these technical factors. We just give you a really beautiful picture of trees,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
no, it's not greenwashing because the forest is real. And if people are like, well, I don't know about this forest, the solution, you know what the solution is? We give them more pictures of trees.
More
It's like,
trees.
here's another picture of like the beautiful forest. It's real.
I have
Look
to
at
show
this,
you
right?
this.
Yeah.
I just picked this book up by accident, and I'm really enjoying it. It's very basic, but it's called you see that Woodland?
It's not. I can sort of tell what it is. It's
It
the
says Woodland Wisdom,
yeah.
Miscellany of Forest Facts, Fiction, and Folklore. I just happened to be at a bookstore and it caught my attention.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow, this is like quite the bookstore that has this thing.
Yeah.
But this is the thing that like people understand, right? Like
Yeah.
we like children, like when we talk about climate solutions with children, they don't understand DAC, but they understand trees, right? They
Yes.
understand trees make the environment better. And it's talking about that just makes more sense to regular people. And it's like, no, it's not greenwashing. Here it
Yeah.
is. If you don't trust our tree, you can grow your own tree and it's
Yeah. Go
real. You can
ahead.
trust that,
Yeah.
right?
Go ahead.
The universal accessibility of it is part of what makes this effective.
Yeah. I love it. Well, again, this has been super interesting for me, and I'm sure the audience enjoyed it as well. We'll make sure everybody gets an opportunity to connect and see if they can vote with their checkbook if they want. And
Cool, cool.
then we'll publish this and share it with everybody. And Yishan, thank you for doing this. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you
And
for having me.
I'm sure like I said, the audience will act accordingly. So thank you everybody for being here and sharing with us. The only thing you can't make more of, and that's your time. Sean, thank you. And thank you to Shelley and the team Terraformation. Thank you. Till next time. Thanks. Bye,
Thank you.
Sean. Bye-bye.